Welcome to this week's episode of Surgeon Interrupted. Bright Zhou is an academic family medicine faculty who practices inpatient and outpatient medicine with additional expertise in LGBTQ, immigrant, and behavioral health. They are passionate about linguistic justice, health advocacy, and cultivating authentic relationships with students and residents. AKA the Gen Z attending. I'm like fangirling a little bit, but thank you, Bright, for
Thank
being
you so much for
here
having
today.
me, Francis. I'm so excited to be a part of this podcast and to hopefully give our listeners some new tips and tricks to take away.
Yeah, well, and I'm a honestly younger
Mm,
end millennial, but I'm still pretty
mm.
firmly millennial, and so I just feel like this, hopefully we bump the street cred up a little bit. Like I got one Gen Zer to talk to me long
Oh, I
enough to come on
appreciate it.
here.
Yeah, I really wanted to create a platform with this Gen Z attending to celebrate kind of the unique ideas that I feel like, millennials and Gen Z alike are starting to think about. And we, kind of briefly touched upon new changes in healthcare and healthcare culture that I'm so excited to dive in today with you and our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. And exactly. I mean, I wanted to provide kind of for reference as a
Mm,
millennial physician. I ran up against what I felt like were pretty significant
mm,
cultural divides. I felt them in two ways. I felt them with
mm-hmm,
other physicians, certainly the surgeons who trained us, but then interestingly when I got out into practice as an attending, especially in a
mm,
rural area, I did encounter a patient population that
mm.
preferred or maybe was used to, but honestly also preferred the
Mm,
patriarchal approaches. And so when I would have the super shared decision-making conversation, which I'm
yeah.
very millennial, and I personally love the shared decision-making conversation. I was operating on people I did not believe in, hey, here's your CT
Right.
scan, sinuses look bad, you need surgery. Honestly, all sinus surgery
Yeah.
is elective. So, I definitely fell on that end of the
Mm,
spectrum. And I'm excited to
mm,
learn from you because I do feel like there's even facets of being a Gen Z physician that I
yeah.
don't even know. I haven't even countered and I don't know. So I'm
Yeah.
excited to hear what we should all know about
Yeah.
the Gen Z approach. But I would also just start by asking if you identify with any of this. Do you have a patient population that likes the
Mm.
patriarchal
Wow,
approach?
there's so many areas that we can dive into because on the one hand, I think yes, there is a generational kind of conversation that we can talk about in terms of patients and colleagues, but there's also multifaceted intersectional identities, right? So I do think that a lot of my more immigrant populations, so I speak medical Spanish and Mandarin, and most of my days are actually not in English, and I'm mostly caring for Spanish and Mandarin speaking patients.
Wow.
And so in practice, I actually do have a little bit more of a patriarchal approach, not intentionally, but more just because that's what my patients have trained me to prefer. Where it's
Mm-hmm.
whatever you say, doc, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever you want, and and yet there is still a slight difference than saying, okay, well, yeah, it is what I say, versus a newer approach, which is still combining that patient-centered counseling. I would say that the main difference between, from what I'm noticing, and I'm still very late Gen Z, right? So I think from what I'm noticing as the people are coming
Mm-hmm.
in even more, is we are doing patient-centered approaches, but we are taking a lot of our own personal investment in that decision out. We are moving more and more with
Mm-hmm.
Gen Z clinicians into, hey, I'm presenting all of the materials to you. I'm presenting all of the treatment options to you. It is still patient centered. What decision do you want to make? But your ultimate decision does not have any sort of weight on my identity as a clinician, as a surgeon, as a doctor. Your ultimate, whether you want the surgery or not, whether you want this medication or not, I'm taking the ego or the self out of the equation. And I think that is a new thing that we're seeing in Gen Z attendings and clinicians, where it is sort of like, yeah, we grew up in a space where medicine increasingly has become a service industry. And just like how, your Starbucks barista does not care what your order is, right? They're just here to make your order. Your clinician does care about you and your health, but is not going to be kind of psychologically or egotistically impacted by whether you choose to go with their decision or not. And I think that puts us in a very interesting space because now we have all of the social media and health misinformation where perhaps patients are viewing their doctors as sort of just like waiters or recommenders. And so we're in a very interesting space that I think I'm so excited that we get to talk about today.
Okay, this is amazing. This is so fascinating to me. And honestly, I do have to say, you're gonna think I'm bragging. You're gonna be like, what a pick me move. But I can relate
Mm,
to what you're saying. I
yeah.
actually took that approach. Like, I love that you tied it to ego because I do think that how the physician shows up to every room that
Yes.
they show up to, how big of a role
Yes.
ego plays. Yeah, I see that as being like
Mm,
generational. When people call Gen Z physicians quote
mm-hmm.
unquote unserious, I view that actually
Yes.
very positively because I don't equate the term unserious with
Mm,
unintelligent,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
incompetent. I don't. I actually like it because if anything, maybe it tells me that your ego doesn't like run
Yeah.
the show on you. Like I think that being able to bring levity to those situations. But the thing I would say is I totally agree with you. I would literally present
Yeah.
multiple safe options. And when people said, well, which one's the best? I would say, I promise you, I'm never going to
Yeah.
offer you a bad option. I'm not good. If it wasn't safe or it wasn't a good idea at all, I promise, like, I would not offer it as one of the two
Yeah.
or one of the three. And that was a way to kind of get their buy-in. But I love it because I guess, can you speak a little bit more? I want to
Yeah.
go deeper on this
Yeah.
ego piece. Like, I agree with you because I can think of so many doctors, older physicians, where, I mean, if you tell a surgeon that you're
Yeah.
not picking surgery, some people take that
Yeah.
quite
And I
personally.
think it's interesting because, I have this generational, but also we mentioned the immigrant growing up and immigrant households and caring for large immigrants.
Hmm.
Many of my patients at default just don't want to take medications. And so I'm going in to the visit
Hmm.
already thinking, all right, like this is about trust. This is about giving you options. But ultimately, the solution is not going to be you leave taking your statin or you leave deciding that, metformin is what you're going to take away. And instead, it's a lot more of this. And also, like, is this maybe family medicine as well? The conversation is a lot about building a relationship with your patient, building the trust with your patient. And ultimately,
Hmm.
the outcome is just that they leave feeling like they have someone that they can talk to about their issues and their health, but the outcome is not necessarily that I got them to take their med. And I think even the way we talk about medical training is always you build up towards the diagnosis and then you do the treatment. And that like last little bit, like, you think about your SOAP note, A and P is together, assessment and plan is just like the last
Mm.
tiny like 10%. But I think that 10% is so broad, the distance between, yeah, you have diabetes and you should take these meds. We don't talk enough about building that trust, crossing that chasm, because I think traditionally or historically, we've had a lot of ego built in where, okay, well, if the doctor says you have diabetes, you should take these meds, the patient's going to take the meds. And I think a lot of that final step between the assessment and the diagnosis and the treatment is missed, and a lot of the new generational approach to that is taking some ego out of that idea, out of that equation. If you don't want to do my treatment, that's fine. Go see a different doctor. You can see a different specialist. You can see a second or third opinion. It's not as much of a deep personal investment hurt of why wouldn't you believe in me? Why wouldn't you believe in my training? And I think that is something that is very unique that I'm seeing in our new generation. And I think that ego does tie in very, very much, or lack of ego does tie in very much to compensation. I think a lot of our historic models have seen the private clinician or the private physician who is not willing to unionize, is not willing to collaborate with other groups because they feel like there is perhaps some ego involved with, oh, I'm just an employee, right? Like I'm not someone who gets to craft and create my own practice. But I do think that, then we end up getting taken advantage by healthcare insurance companies, by, care management organizations. And so I think a lot of this new ego, taking ego out of the equation allows us to advocate for more, compensation. Whether we like it or not, we are employees. For most of us, like 98% of family physicians, 90% of family physicians are in employed practices. And so if you are in this employed practice, there has to be a little bit of that ego that you interrogate. And I think that is a new approach from Gen Z.
I love it. I mean, you are illuminating a lot of things that are generationally
Mm.
maybe discordant. We'll just say discordant because yes, like certainly I do have a lot of conversations about the benefits of
Mhm.
organizing,
Mhm.
certainly unionizing, but when you can't unionize,
Totally.
then organizing. And there is a lot of pushback from institutional physicians. And I do think that we're all imbued with this
Mm.
scarcity mindset. Like I kind
Mhm.
of feel like, and maybe Gen Z physicians are like
Mm.
rebuking that because I am still firmly, we were brought up in a pretty
Yeah.
cutthroat competitive environment, and it was like there's a
Yes.
scarcity mindset. And if, I mean, even the idea of organizing, like, why
Yes.
would I collaborate with kind of
Right. Right.
my
Right.
enemies? You know, I've shared a little bit about in the past, like being a gunner in
Mhm.
medical school. Like, unfortunately, I didn't know
Mm.
better when I was a very young kid.
Yeah.
Like in my early 20s, I bought into all
Yeah.
of the hullabaloo. I think that hopefully Gen Z like
Hopefully,
sees
yeah.
through that more and
I
just
mean,
is like,
I
I don't
definitely
have to buy
trained with
that.
gunners, so I'm not saying that there's no gunners in Gen Z, and I think this is why it's so important to perhaps start our podcast with this sort of positionality statement. Like I'm Gen Z, I'm also immigrant, or and I'm also family medicine, and I think there's a lot of personality differences between different specialties, and so part of this conversation is also perhaps a commentary on surgery versus family medicine, primary care. And I don't have a pulse on what the generational differences are within surgery. And that's definitely you have much more of a pulse there.
Hmm.
But even within our family medicine space, I think I trained with a lot of kind of what we called old guard clinicians who, did everything for their patients, full
Hmm.
spectrum. And I still practice to many extents full spectrum medicine, but it is in a way that I think still centers myself. There's a classic conversation in family medicine about OB, right? We do OB in family medicine. We deliver babies,
Yes.
but with the family
Right.
medicine model, it's historically been you are on call 24/7 to deliver your patient because you carried them throughout prenatal, and also you maybe raised them since they were a kid. Like this is your patient cradle to grave, right? But
Wow.
the OB part requires you to be awake at 3 a.m., right? Because this is your patient, right? It's not like you're part of a call group that's just taking care of anyone who comes into the hospital. And so I think there's a lot of fascinating conversations happening in family medicine about what does the idea of a hospitalist OB group take away from the ethos of what is family medicine, or vice versa. And I think, I don't practice OB
Hmm.
anymore. I was trained to practice non-surgical obstetrics, and I loved it. But I do think that is another very interesting topic that Gen Z actually does play with, because many Gen Zers are thinking, I don't want to be on call 24/7 for my patients, right? Like I love my patients. I want to be there for them, but I want to be there for them in my time, 8 to 5, 8 to 9, or whatever your, call schedule might look like. And so we're increasingly changing our approach to what even medical practice looks like. And that perhaps is uh, equal across surgery and medicine. But I also think I talked to a lot of our patients. Now I have friends who are getting pregnant and having kids, and I ask them like, "What's the difference to you?" And a lot of them say, like I get it. I would like to have my prenatal doc deliver me, but I also get that you can't be on call 24/7. And so I think our patients are also coming to a newer understanding of what they expect of their doctors. You don't expect your restaurant waiter, your, like all of these other service industry folks to be on call 24/7. And so why would you expect these employed physician practices to do the same? And so I think there are some changes both from the patient end and also the doctor end, that hopefully will make for better work-life balance for all people.
Yes, and I think that, like you said, now patient
Yes.
expectations are shifting a little bit. I think that like whatever we tolerate is
Yes.
what persists.
I
And
like
once
that.
there's like a critical mass in an industry, critical mass towards people just saying like that's fine, there's going to be some maybe holdouts, there's going to be the old guard, you don't have to change everyone's mind, but you reach a critical mass of this is what the expectations are, this is what is reasonable and respectful to all parties involved. And I think that that last piece of like what's respectful to all parties involved, the physicians and the patients, I think that that has not been a question that anyone has been thinking
Yeah.
up until recently. Like people have just been thinking what is good for and
Yeah.
respectful to the patients, which I 100% agree.
Hmm.
That's an important question. Like, I'm glad we've been asking that question, but obviously kind of to the detriment of the
Mm.
physician. And and like a lot of us are
Mm.
feeling the effects of that. One article I was looking up, like as
Mm.
you were talking, it reminded me of this was a huge Wall
Mm.
Street Journal article. I'm looking at, oh, it was 2024,
Mm.
just about a year ago, right? It was a huge profile. I'll read you the title. Young doctors want work-life balance, period. Older doctors say that's not the job, period.
I think I think many of us can relate to that headline. Definitely.
Well, and exactly, and it really, it was a well-done piece. I
Mm.
remember it from a year ago, and like you were hitting on all of these themes. But
Mm.
here's what I will say. You using the analogy of
Yeah.
the service industry jobs and like arguing in part that like medicine is now it is a service industry. I just think that would get many doctors I know so tied up in knots. It might make them frankly nauseous. It might nauseate them.
Hmm.
And I guess, have you seen much pushback to even that
Yeah.
ideal? Like, I would be afraid, and genuinely, like, I love it. I'm here for it, but I would be afraid to even probably use that type of language in a room full
You're
of doctors.
no,
I
you're
would be
so
afraid.
right.
I'd be like, you guys could take me.
The service industry is a large percentage of what Gen Z knows, but I will say that, in primary care, we have a lot of new kind of independent practice models rising, like direct primary care, which is super amazing. Something that I've actually looked into a lot in terms of rebalancing that work-life balance
Mhm.
and giving some control and agency over your practice. So I definitely want to acknowledge that the independent practice, whether it's direct primary care, whether it's solo private practice across surgery and medicine, is still alive and thriving and robust. I think that if you pick out your like average family medicine grad, at least I'm only really plugged into the family medicine space, but if you choose your average family medicine
Mhm.
grad, they're likely going to be in an employed practice. And whether that's good or not, I think
Right.
I like I said have looked a lot into DPC. I love the idea of DPC. So I'm not necessarily stating that it's a good thing that we're all in employed practice, but the thing is, if you are in employed practice, we got to act like employees, like at the end of the
Mhm.
day, you can't be in employed practice and pretend like you're still an independent clinician. And I think some of these healthcare systems that are trying to claim, no, you really have control of your clinic or control of your office, it's not true, right? Like you don't have control of your clinic. You're going to be double booked, scheduled, kind of at the whims of the bureaucratic, often non-physician C-suite, and so it doesn't actually serve us to hold on to that conflicting ideal of I am an employed physician, but I'm acting as a solo independent practice. You should just do solo independent practice if that's the ideal, right? And I totally support that, and that should be a thing. But if you are doing employed practice, let's talk about benefits. Let's talk about so many of our I'm in an academic space. So many of our academic centers this year, especially, have gone through giant budget cuts, and I'm thinking about how I mean, all of us
Yeah.
have felt a lot of budgetary strains, but we were just told like you're not getting this bonus, you're not getting this merit raise, you're not getting this or that, and it just felt very like okay, like we just had to take that and versus our amazing nursing colleagues versus some of our other healthcare professionals that are so well unionized who can kind of push back a little bit and say oh actually no, like that's not written into our contract, we actually have collective support, and if this is not met, we will kind of have like peaceful non-resistance, non-compliance, resistance strikes, other ways to kind of address that. I do think that that is something that clinicians, physicians are very wary of and very kind of confused about, honestly. And so I think something to really look at is all of these physician residency unions, right? So many unions are popping up across the country. That's so new. That's Gen Z, right? Like the clinicians, I trained in a program where I was one of the
Mhm.
first people to unionize, right? And
Yeah.
so it's not just me saying it. Like
Wow.
to the room of clinicians to the room of physicians who are ready to jump on me and say we're all here for the independent practice. Look around, like all of these physician unions, all of these resident unions are popping up at so many of these academic spaces, and it's time people are starting to see their job as something that has more collective power than individual.
I feel like I'm speechless. Like you articulated it really incredibly well, but also I think that you called out something
Hmm.
so real Certainly kind of a blind spot for me because again, I came up in it, and yes, I came up in surgery, which is like mired in everybody's blind spots because it is a
Mm,
quite egotistically driven industry, and I
mm,
don't exclude
mm.
myself from that. Like I don't know any surgeons where ego's just not present in the room. Because we put up
Yes,
with a
you
lot
do.
of
You do.
BS, and like we do, and
You
we
do.
sacrifice a lot, and even where you don't get paid in money, you get paid a little
Yes.
bit in ego
Yes.
boost.
I
So
mean, let's talk about that.
people
Let's
who
talk about that. Yes, ego is very real and it's a very real compensation. Let's put it on the table, right? I'm not saying Gen Z doesn't have ego, but we are asking that ego to also be part of the explicit compensation package. Time is part of the compensation package. Money is always has always been, but can you buy out my time to do extra projects? Can you buy out rewards and accolades? That is very real compensation
yes.
that I think we often sleep on as centers and healthcare systems.
Exactly, but the way that you're saying, like,
Yes.
put it on the table. Like,
Yeah.
"Hey, I have an ego. My ego
Yeah.
likes stuff. My ego, is
Yeah.
part of capitalism. Like, what's up? It's on the table and we can talk about it." Because
Mm,
what's crazy, right, is that, like, it has not traditionally been
mm,
on the table, and not only that, but hundreds, so many doctors that I talk to, they'll be like,
mm,
"I don't have an ego.
mm,
How dare you say that I have an ego or that I'm
mm,
being paid an ego?" And I'll just be like, I don't know, you sound egotistical right now, for instance. Like, but this all comes from I have been a person even since my
mm.
pre-med days of like, let's
Yeah.
call a spade a spade.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, and I
Yeah.
own my own ego. My own ego has gotten me into so many sticky,
True.
unfavorable
True.
situations. And
Same.
like, I can't, what am I going to do? Deny it? Lie about it?
Same. Same.
No, I'm not gonna do what like what your
Yes.
grandparents did, which is just like, and the last thing that I think ties into this conversation is, and this even came up in like the Wall
Mm,
Street Journal piece, but it's like this
mm,
work is sacred, right? You're talking service
mm,
industry language,
mm,
which is very like it's not personal,
mm,
it's not about me. If the patient
mm,
decides X, Y, or Z, the other end of the spectrum is the old guard saying, this
mhm,
work is sacred, and if you even
mm.
ask for a raise that's, like, commensurate with
Yeah.
cost of living or inflation or anything, that implies that
Yeah.
you aren't here for
Yeah.
the right reasons, and you don't appreciate
I
the
agree.
sacred nature of the work.
That
So
thank
what
you for
would you
bringing
say
and
to
I
that?
have been told that, right? I have been told that, you know, this should be enough, right? The sanctity of the work that we do should be enough compensation. And you already have, and I will say, like, I did not come from a family of a lot of wealth growing up, and I didn't come from a family physician. So what I make is so much money to me. But when I see kind of just the ways that healthcare spending is wasteful in our healthcare system, even in independent practices. I do think that at the end of the day, the ultimate driver of the healthcare system is the patient clinician and all the healthcare team, of course, that is with it. But the players who are on the field are so often ignored. And I would say that to the patient. Honestly, I don't care about the old guard. I'm caring about the patient. I don't want the patient to feel that I don't care about
Yeah.
them, right? So in this whole conversation about ego and not ego, like the old guard is old, they're not going to be here in the next 30, 40 years, right? And so for me, it's more, I don't want my patients to feel that I don't care about them. And so I'm trying to put forth a narrative on my social media accounts that is very patient centered and very, here's the medical education,
Mhm.
here's why you should talk to your family med doc or to your doc in general. And I'm here for you, and you can access all of my content 24/7. But for me to be here for you at my best from 8 to 5, I have to recharge off of my time, right? From 5 to 8 the next time. And I think that I mean, we can talk about this next, but there's so many ways that AI, social media, technology is changing the face of the landscape of healthcare that allows us to reimagine what a 20-minute visit can actually look like, what healthcare can look like, right? We can expand beyond the clinic walls. Patients don't have to wait 3 months to learn about diabetes. There's Google, there's YouTube, there's so many information that your patient will come to already with some knowledge around their illnesses already. And so, yes, you still have those 20 minutes, but what can you do instead of approaching it with a traditional?
Yeah, like
So I
setting
would
up.
answer the question with sort of like
Yeah.
a, it really doesn't pertain to me or to our generation what this sort of sanctity or not value is. What's much more important is convincing my patients that their care is still very important to me. But perhaps sanctity is not what I would call it, because I also will not give up my like 7 p.m., 8 p.m. protected time with my family, as long as I'm not on call, of course. To kind of do that. And that's why we have call systems. That's why we built out all of these like hospitalists and laborists and all of these network systems, because all of us are acknowledging we can't be on call 24/7. And that just isn't good care. And that sanctity of care is from the patient end too, maybe not the best care.
Yeah, and it isn't
Yes.
sustainable. Like those people who are talking about like it's sacred work, so do it forever without, changes in
Yeah.
your compensation. That's not a forever model. I know a lot of doctors who just do it until
Right.
they can't do it anymore and then
Right.
something's cut short. Or they do it, but they're kind of
Yeah.
miserable sods about it the whole time. And that's not you
No, it's
preserving the
not.
sanctity of the clinician patient relationship. Guess what? You're
Yeah.
just kind of a jerk. No one likes you. No, your patient, like, I mean, just truly, right? Like, it scares even me because over these
Mm,
past few years, I've seen a rise in patients
mm,
saying to me, my doctor was so mean
mm,
to
mm,
me. So, like,
mm.
these people, like, and it usually is more of like that old guard, right? It's this person who's
Yeah.
just like working,
Yeah.
maybe more patriarchal, but the patients and families are like confused. They're like, I don't know, like, they seemed upset. Like, our
Yeah.
doctor's okay? To which I'm always
Yeah.
like, it's
Yeah.
getting hairy now. But, like, again, the
Yeah.
sanctity that you are running off of, it's not keeping you even like pleasant, patient
Yeah.
centered,
Can I
kind.
say something actually about that you made me think? Um, this might be spicy take, but we're here for spicy takes. I think the patient
Yeah.
doctor relationship or divide is also changing, right? And doctors are now patients, right? There are
Yeah.
doctors who are no longer men who can just work in the home or like work away from the home for their entire days and then come back and have their partners support their family, right? So doctors are now patients and patients are now doctors. We now have people in the community, all communities, who are rising up, not enough, but rising up to
Mm,
become physicians. When we talk about immigrant health, when we talk about gender equity, when we talk about racial equity, it means that the divide between doctor and patient is blurring. It's no longer, we are no longer visualizing one
mm,
prototype or archetype of what a doctor looks like. And so instead, I think that is also helping not only the Gen Z part, but also I think that's also helping us protect our peace, because it's not, I do so much for my community. I am the community. You know what I mean? Like I'm in the community as a member, and I'm not someone who is kind of distance. And we have these like kind of global health manifest
mhm.
destiny tropes of medicine. I'm there, like I'm in the community, and so I think there's a lot of that also serves me and feeds my ego, but also feeds my openness to be okay with doing this sort of boundary work. Because yeah, like I work, play, eat, and in the communities that I serve, and it's not like I am just here to kind of do my
Wow.
like sanctity 24/7 care. Like I'm here, I'm with you. And so that sort of blurring of division between patient and doctor is also something that increasingly I think empowers physicians to put healthy boundaries up.
Yeah. I think that's very powerful what you're describing, and I was picturing, like, the old guard in
Mhm.
their ivory tower, because absolutely, like, they are right, and in, like, small
Mm,
town medicine, like, those people are, like,
mm,
town celebs, you know? I mean, there
mm.
has been, for
Yeah.
many decades, this celebrated, propped
Yeah.
up division, and I like that it's blurring, I personally really, have always been made quite
Mm,
uncomfortable by
yeah.
that divide, or when people try to put surgeons
Mm,
on a pedestal. And, I recently talked about this a little bit because I just was like, I judge you based on how far you can make
mhm.
it at a party without bringing up
Yes.
being a doctor. And, I was just I was on, like, I mean, I'm kind of kidding, but at the same time, I take pride. And one of
Mm,
my proudest things is like for the past couple years, I mean, I can
yeah.
go out in Nashville. We could probably have several drinks and have a lovely
Yeah.
long evening, and you would
That's
not know that I was
amazing.
a doctor. And that, to me, is the biggest compliment
Yes.
to
Because you
me.
have other interests and you have other passions, and not only passions and interests, because that's very frivolous. You have other pillars of morality that exist beyond clinic and hospital spaces that drive your life.
Yes,
Yes.
derive meaning from areas other than my practice of medicine and surgery. And and again, I say this all, I feel like I'm allowed to take shots at the egotistical person who walks in and it's like, "What's up? I'm a
Yeah.
surgeon," and they like flex because
Mm.
I was that person in former, Francis May 2.0 was that person. So when I
Huh.
roast that like
Hmm.
caricature,
Hmm.
it's me.
Hmm.
It's a self-own. So again, but like we grew
Yeah.
past it, and that's why I'm so vocal about it, because I'm like, listen, like this feels so much better
Mm.
than like the
Mm.
old way. Like decentering profession from
Love that.
core identity, which that is work, but I am part of, I'm in my 30s now, and I know so many people who are like fighting for their lives doing this work in their
Mm.
30s and 40s. And certainly if I could recommend it to anyone, I'd be like, just don't center it in the first place and have to do all this very
Mm.
painful
Mm.
unwinding work. Because the last thing I'm excited to talk about
Mm.
AI and kind of this infrastructure that you're
Yeah.
describing for your patients. But before we move to that, my last thought is I just feel like you very plainly stated extremely real, such
Mm.
resonant, accurate situations in the hospital. Because what I heard you kind of describing, you were like, look, if you are a employed physician, which I know you mentioned kind of around like 90% in family medicine, I certainly have seen the rates like
Uh-huh.
across specialties nationally that
Uh-huh.
are like at 80%. So
Uh-huh.
very high for all of us. I was an employed ENT attending. So it's like, again, call a spade a spade. Many of us are in that situation. I would say the majority of concerns, daily troubles that attending physicians I know deal with and have and grapple with are from this core problem where they are
Mm.
employed physicians, but they are not
Mm.
acting like it. And so when reality doesn't meet the expectation of, hey, I should have total say over my schedule.
Mm.
Hey, I should have say over who my practice manager is and like my full staff. Yet I'm not getting complete control of that. I'm having issues here, here, and here. I think they run up against that wall like every single day, and it contributes to faster burnout for these attending physicians. And I feel like you're saying maybe acknowledge that you work for someone else and are knowingly giving up a say in X and Y and Z so that you don't get your feelings hurt every single day. I used to be more in that
Mm.
group, right? Like you, every day you show up um kind of like
Hmm.
eyes wide shut. And so when things go the way that you could expect at an employed
Yeah.
physician job, but you don't prepare ahead for that or like accept it, there's some level of denial. There's some level of I'm
Yeah.
still the doctor. I'm the doctor and things are going to go my way today. And then like every day in a row for I don't know 600
Yeah.
days they don't go that way.
I
Now you're
I
burnt out.
I yeah.
Now you're crying
I
leaving the
totally agree
hospital
with
every day.
that. And I would want to even broaden that out more. Like to be honest, the onus is not on the individual physician to kind of what you said, give up the dreams or aspirations of independent practice. I think the onus is on the system to acknowledge and prioritize those still very important independent practices. And there's no way that the system is going to give you more time with your patients, allow you more flexibility in your scheduling because it doesn't make them money unless we have collective power, unless we have collective reasoning. And so my whole, I don't know if this is Gen Z or not, but my what I've learned and what I've read and what I've talked to with my friends, it really is we have to put individual onus, both ego and responsibility. We have to look broader. We have to say the responsibility to make this change in part is on the individual physician, but it is also on the collective system that created the system to begin with. And I think so many of us train. The other thing that we should talk about is the attending model, right? So many of us go through residency with these attendings, and I'm an attending myself, and I definitely practice with ego as an attending. And so you see this idea of like an independent attending who gets to tell you what to do, and then you do it, and then the work gets done. And then you go into real practice. If you're not in academics, you kind of expect that. You, as an attending, I get to then have this kind of control over my operating space or over my clinic space. And when that doesn't happen, that adds to exactly what you said, the burnout that you have. And in addition to the individual maybe resetting their expectations, it really should be why shouldn't a physician be able to design their space in a way that optimally works for them, right? Like why shouldn't that happen where we don't get 10-minute visits with our patients in primary care, or we don't have to be forced to do surgeries back to back to back all day, That's what I'm saying. There's only so much self-talk, self-resetting that we can do as individuals before we need to think collaboratively and collectively about what can our systems do for us in return. And again, I feel like this is like very radical, novel, but it's just like I reach towards our other service workers and industry workers because the labor movement is not new, it's not radical, and I just think that we are just waking up to
Yeah.
it as clinicians and physicians.
Totally, totally. And I agree with you. I appreciate you calling that out because I am not, uh, it's tough because I work with so many physicians and just myself was a physician who was like in kind of like immediate
Yeah.
danger
Oh,
and
yeah.
like under duress. And so sometimes my advice is like, here's how to relate to your surroundings differently
Yeah,
so that you
exactly.
don't
So you
die,
can survive.
like
Yeah,
legitimately. So exactly, but I agree that that doesn't change, certainly it doesn't make things better for the next generation of physicians. That's an area of interest and passion for me, but
mm,
here's my concern, is that collective work and advocacy and
it
change takes
does.
a long time. So this goes back to how I keep ending up trying to give people
Yeah,
like band-aids,
love
like
it.
temporary stays, like run out the clock and stuff. Because collective action, it's not fast. And this is a group of people that inherently does not appear to like to organize and
Yeah,
be like collective. And then when you talk about what the system should do for us, I totally philosophically am
yeah,
like, I would love that. I would love for the system to do that for us. Exactly. The system is not incentivized to do it. It is literally like heuristically
yeah,
designed to protect itself. Like the system
yeah,
does not love you back. So we can't wait for the
right?
system to buy in. I agree with you. It's kind of like a collective
Yeah,
organizing or unionizing. And again, looking at other areas where the labor movement was more successful. But it's crazy because we have this group of
totally. You
personalities
know, and it comes
that
it comes
that
back to ego, Francis, because I
that's
yes,
what I was gonna say. It
because
is
I
ego. People are like,
yes,
this isn't labor.
yes,
Don't lump me in
exactly.
with the labor
I
movement.
unionized at my institution before for residency for a contract that I didn't benefit from. Right. So I worked, and it's also very short. It's only like, it doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
I will put this out there. It doesn't take 10 years to create a union, right? It took us, 2, 3 years of collective labor. And I was working with this group to create a contract that I knew I would graduate by the time that it really realistically resulted in any sort of salary increase or benefits increase. And again, I really do have an ego, and I want to not say that, oh, you can't. But like, I think divorcing the idea of this is just for me. But I love what you said, Francis, about the next generation. That should be enough. Making this a better place than we found it. That should be enough reason to set that ego aside and say, maybe I do want to advocate for better change. Because even if it doesn't benefit me, I have the power now as a resident, as opposed to a medical student, to speak up for med students. And now as an attending to speak up for residents and medical students. And so I'm looking to our C-suite. There are physician leaders that we do have in these spaces, and I'm looking to them for leadership and for very strong but difficult conversations where they should say, yeah, we can make this space even better. And that's why the conversation around compensation, I think so many people say, you already make so much money, right? But it's not about money in this regard. It's about setting aside spaces that are longitudinally and sustainable, as you said, for the next generation. And so that's something that I will just say, like, if people are willing to give up a little bit of that, it doesn't serve me. Serving those who come after us should be just as powerful of a motivation to do this work.
It's beautiful. I love it. I do have to just, I
Yeah,
have to
please,
just play
please,
devil's
please.
advocate for 1 second, even though
No, I
sometimes
love
we
it.
hate devil's advocate, but it's like, I, you know, I agree that it should be enough. I even, when I tried to improve the
Mm,
culture at my residency program, it was mostly done like my chief
yeah,
year. So exactly, it was like, I'm
exactly.
on my way out. So, I'm not
Right.
saying this for my own
Exactly.
benefit because I'm
Yeah,
chilling. I'm already a chief. Like, you can't really, what are
exactly.
you going to do to me? I'm on my way out, but I'm
Mm,
trying to improve this. But
hmm,
what kills me is that the system, your proposed concept of, even though
yeah,
this doesn't serve me, I will still invest some of my valuable time or limited
right,
bandwidth into this. Well, guess what? At the risk of
right.
saying something spicy, like the system is also
Mm,
designed in a way that it's like pretty soul crushing and it leaves very
totally.
limited bandwidth for the
Yeah,
individuals within it. And again, I don't think
yeah.
that's accidental. Like, so we are within a system, and that's why it's important to understand organizational dynamics. That's why it's important to like open your eyes and like
Yes.
look around you and also look
Yeah.
at labor movements of the past, even though again it requires taking the ego out of it, because a lot of doctors would be like,
Yeah.
I'm an
Yeah.
intellectual, like
It's
I'm a
true. It's
scientist
true.
and a clinician, so I don't know
About
what you're
labor.
saying
Yeah.
I have in common
Right.
with
Right.
Starbucks
Mm,
employees.
mm, mm.
Nothing. And it's like, okay, if you say so, but like
Yeah.
literally open your
I
eyes,
think
right?
that to address the point about, you have limited bandwidth, why invest it in anyone but yourself is so real and so valid. And I one thing that I will say is that to give an example, to give a concrete example, I work actually, despite all of this negative kind of talk, I actually work in a current academic center with people that I just love and I respect and I value their leadership style. And I think that is, if I can speak from like one of the up and coming attendings, that is worth it to me. Like if I see every one of my leaders, my PD, my APD, my department chair, as investing their limited
Hmm.
bandwidth into empowering me to create the social media career, to speak out, to help other people also do, like, they're okay with me doing this work. They're empowering me to do this work. And that is what investment can look like, right? We don't all have to just unionize. There's not just one option for
Mm,
what the work is. And I think
yeah.
most physicians, surgeons included, will count mentoring as an important part of their portfolio of compensation, right? And so I just think that the mentoring doesn't have to be uniquely so that you can look like me, so that you can become me, right? I'm doing things that the other people in my department don't have the skill sets to do, such as reaching out to you and doing the social media work. But they are so supportive and they're so expansive and and creating this space, and I see that as investment. They don't have to meet with me to talk about stuff that's not directly generating revenue, right? They can just say, no, just see more patients,
Hmm.
right? But to do this work requires community, and it really requires like the woo-woo, nice love. Like I believe in that. We need to be compassionate people to one another. Even if there are listeners out there who are saying, I am an intellectual, I don't align myself with the service industry, or I have my own personal private practice, I do encourage them to think about at least what does mentorship and compassion look like for you? And is that enough you don't have to unionize, but can you at least support and not stand in barrier to those who are hoping to make it better for them and the next generation?
I love that. I'm thrilled for you. That's very
Hmm.
moving, I think. I'm glad that you
Yeah.
have a community at your workplace. I think that there's all sorts of lessons that surgeons could take
Hmm.
from family medicine physicians. Like I definitely do think that stereotypically and thematically, like there's some things you guys
I
do
appreciate
really very well, including like compassion, mentorship that
TBD.
TBD. Surgeons are going
TBD.
to get it
Gen Z
together
surgery.
someday.
That's next. Just Gen Z surgeon. We need them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm interested. I do also really believe in kind of like the next generation just always being like
Yes.
smarter and figuring
100%.
out stuff faster in a way that we
Yep.
should just
Yep.
again put our ego aside and
Yep.
say like I love
Yes.
this for all of us because I can also
Yes.
learn from
Yes.
Gen Z. Well, Bright, I know
Mm.
we're short on time, but I do want to make sure because honestly, I'd just love to hear um kind of like your
Mm, mm,
elevator
mm.
pitch for AI, its role in your practice, and how it helps to continue to break down barriers between
Yeah.
physician and patient, and also expand your
Yeah.
20-minute
I love
visit with
that.
them.
And I will add in the piece about education as well, right? Making um attending to resident
Yeah.
educator. My elevator pitch is just that I am not an expert in AI. I think that my residents are more experts than I am, and I'm like I was just in training like 2 years ago. So like, but they are already way better than I am at using all the different ways, open
Mhm.
evidence and various other kind of like subscribed software. And my biggest thing about AI is to treat it with an open lens, to be critical. I do share some of the kind of like I notice a lot of old guards being critical about AI, and I share some of that critique. I do know that there's lots of mistakes that are made, but to be open to the idea of freeing
Yeah.
up labor, right? So that you can use that intellectual brain of yours to make more sound clinical decisions, and to spend more time investing in that sanctity of your patient relationship. I think the intent of AI is very aligned with all of us in medicine. It just takes a little bit of learning, but we're lifelong learners, and it takes a little bit of openness.
Yeah.
And I think specifically, this is where being an attending has been so powerful, because I am learning all the time from my residents about, do you know about this new tool, this new app? And I'm just like, no, teach me. And hopefully that continues. I know I'm very new, but hopefully that continues as an attending. And so, yeah, my pitch is just that I'm not an expert in this space, but I do think that there is a lot of growth and potential to make our work better. And so it should be an investment at all levels, from our students, from our learners, our actual colleagues, and then also our system to invest in this for us. So that's my pitch about AI. And then social media, I think, is so new. We're still very early. I definitely think, like, I myself am practicing in systems where it's not a given that you can have a separate social media account. And I'm sure you have heard, you yourself, and you've heard from others as well. And so my pitch would be to have healthcare systems be open to all learners creating good evidence-based content, ultimately for patient education. And I think there's a fear that a healthcare system has, that they cannot control the content that's being created by their individual employees. And I think as long as that's why we're so careful to not name our institutions. And if we can kind of just operate separately as this is just Gen Z attending and not wherever I come from, I do think that there is a lot of value in broadening all of this as that's happening, so our patients can look to us and not just Google and WebMD, and they can actually see a little bit more humanity in the midst of all of the AI created stuff that's out there. Yeah.
Amazing. I love it. I think your residents are really lucky to have you. We were lucky to have you join me on here today for today's recording. Thank you so much for being here.
I would love to be here.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're going to have to do additional deep dives to come. But we're going to sign off for today. So you can be found at Gen Z Attending on TikTok and Instagram. We will link those in the show notes. It's great, very clear branding, very easy to find you, I think, online. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Surgeon Interrupted. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. Until next week, remember what Bright said about bringing more compassion and mentorship and investment all into our lives. Take care.